Welcome to this episode on Ramadan during pregnancy. Joining me is Dr Inayah Zaheen. Inayah is a recently qualified GP who's based in North East London, who has a huge passion for community building and podcasting. She's the co-founder of the Submissions podcast and discussion circle for Muslim women called Chit Chat Chai. Love the name. And also the mother of a 2.5-year-old Amana. And when asked what's her proudest achievement, she says, although it's cliche, Amana is definitely her proudest achievement. That's the most common answer for an obvious reason.
It's hard work.
Yeah. Let's get into it. So, it seems to me that all of the recommendations about fasting in pregnancy seem to say, don't fast. That's what I've seen. And I want to get into a little bit about what does it say in the Quran? Are there any suggestions from a religious point of view? And then I can kind of get into a little bit about, as an obstetrician, why is it not recommended from a medical point of view?
So in Surah Baqarah, which is the second surah of the Quran, so the second chapter of the Quran, I'll just read it directly. And it's talking about fasting and the obligation to fast. And then it says that whoever of you is ill or on a journey, then fast an equal number of days after Ramadan. So basically make up the fast that you missed, but you don't have to fast in Ramadan. And then it also says, for those who can only fast with extreme difficulty, compensation can be made by feeding a needy person every day not fasted. And so the pregnancy itself is not explicitly mentioned in the Quran, but I think it comes under, most scholars would say that it comes under the extreme difficulty or, being ill. Because sometimes you definitely feel like that, especially in the first trimester. And then so the general kind of consensus among scholars that I know of is that you are exempt from fasting in Ramadan if you're pregnant. But if you choose to do so, you may. But as I mentioned, it's not like an obligation on you.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. And I guess from a medical point of view, we don't really recommend that it's not recommended that anyone who's pregnant fast. And especially not for people who've got any complications, say for anemic or got gestational diabetes or even issues with the thyroid, for example. But I was looking at, is there evidence behind this, right? But obviously, yeah, I don't know if you, because obviously you're a doctor as well as your personal experiences, there's more systematic reviews, and that's supposed to be, this golden nut of like, this is evidence base or something can be, that's looked at fasting in Ramadan and whether that's associated with pregnancy outcomes for mum and for baby. And actually the overall theme that I could see is that there isn't that much high quality evidence, which makes trials have been done with people fasting pregnancy, for example. Now, overall, the feeling is that there aren't actually any long-term effects from what we can tell in terms of effects on baby or mum. And if there is any effects that were shown, it was usually in low quality studies. That's what I see. Yeah. Did you, when you were deciding what to do when you were pregnant, where did you kind of look to for information? Did you look at any?
So, yeah, I'm really into looking at evidence. And you're right, all of the things I found wasn't that robust. And anything that was robust didn't really show any evidence of harm to mother or baby. And most of it showed more that if it was first trimester or third trimester. And actually, when I was discussing with you before the episode, I managed to fast within the second trimester, which is when Ramadan fell. I think the other issue as well, obviously, with these studies or any studies, is that Ramadan moves back 10 days every year. So you're comparing like a June Ramadan in England, which is like 20 hours, to December Ramadan, which is 8. I think it's really difficult to make that comparison. And I'm sure in December it's probably not any issue. And are you comparing a country that's very humid or where people are sweating lots and getting dehydrated? Are you comparing it? So I just think that there's loads of questions. When I was listening to the studies, it was really unclear, are they actually standardizing for these questions? And I don't think they did. And also it's hard to do, isn't it? Most of them are sort of retrospective, and they sort of look at all this. And then some of the studies, I think, will say things like women possibly exposed to Ramadan but not sure if they were fasting have been included in the studies. So then you were like, what does that even mean?
What does that mean? Great.
So I think that's the main So I did a lot of research, obviously, because I didn't want to harm my child or myself. And the overwhelming thing I found was medically speaking, there wasn't a clear consensus on fasting itself. And also within pregnancies are so different, aren't they? Like some people have loads of complications, some people breeze through with no issues, some people and it's a bit like lots of things with women's health.
Definitely. So every pregnancy is different. But also it's interesting what you were saying about Ramadan, because I was on the labour ward and I was taking handover from the night registrar who's fasting, and I was like, how's it going? And she was like, mate, it's only 14 hours this year. Fine. That's just like any chance. And then I was like, and how is it when you're on night shift? She was like, oh. So that's so different what you were saying from being in like June when the days are so just, it has its benefits, but in terms of window and also the climate that you're in. So it's interesting what you were saying about the role of timing. Can you tell me a bit more about how timing affected your decision to fast? Like you were in your pregnancy as well as when Ramadan was?
Yeah, sure. So actually, just before I do that, in response to your previous question about the resources I looked at, so there's the BIMA, British Islamic Medical Association. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they do a lot of good work, and they made this Ramadan sort of table. I can link it to you, and it's got like all the health conditions, and then it's got like a kind of grading of like a green, red, amber about whether you can fast, whether you should really be cautious, and red is obviously just don't fast.
Yeah.
And I think they did pregnancy quite specifically with like trimester, pregnancy with complications, uncomplicated pregnancy, etc. And they had that. So that I used that, and it was really, really useful. So yeah, I can send you that as well. So it's really nice kind of table, and it lays it out, and you can just look it up, and you can send it to your patients as well.
Helpful.
Hello?
Traffic light system is so helpful to know.
So helpful. So I used that, and I think that one and a lot of the evidence and most of the suggestions were saying that first trimester avoid, because obviously you're more sick, you're more unwell, body's doing a lot more, and in general also there's a higher risk of miscarriage, so it's not always clear. I mean, there's no evidence that fasting causes miscarriage, but most mums probably wouldn't be able to. You might feel a bit guilty if you have a miscarriage and feel like, oh my God, it must have been because I fasted. And then third trimester, because your calorie intake increases, for women, they say that you should have on average about 300 to 500 more calories per day. Mm-hmm. So then that also, they were saying that, it's probably not a good idea. So I was 24 weeks pregnant when Ramadan started and 28 when it finished. So I was like, oh, great. It's like kind of at the end. Sorry, it was bang in the middle. And the other thing is I knew that I was exempt, so I never set out to fast the whole month. I just said, I'm going to take it one day at a time. I'll see how it goes. If I struggle, then, I know there's an exemption. And if I find it easy, then I'll just, try the next day. And I ended up fasting the whole month because alhamdulillah, thanks to God, it was really, really easy for me. And I think the reason for that is because prior to Ramadan, prior to pregnancy, in Ramadan, I'm normally very what's the word? Lazy is a good word, maybe. So in the mornings, I eat our pre-fasting meal. I would normally just have like a date and a glass of milk before I was pregnant. Sometimes just a glass of milk, sometimes just a glass of water. So very, very little, and then get through the day very sluggish and struggling. Whereas in Ramadan, for pregnancy, I was very determined that I'm fasting. I'm growing a child. I need to be really good with my health. I need to be really nourished and hydrating. So I was drinking loads of water in the time that we were allowed to drink and eat overnight, about at least 2.5 to 3 liters, which is not something I do regularly outside of pregnancy. So I was really, really drinking, and I was having really, really nourishing superfood type smoothies and bowls. It was quite funny because I was like, wow, I don't eat like this generally. And I think for that reason, I think I found it relatively quite easy because I was just so well nourished the whole time. And I think that's a really important thing. I think if women are choosing to fast in Ramadan and they're pregnant, I think nutrition is so important to make sure that it's something that is paid attention to, and it's not just those fried stuff or things that are not good for you.
Oh yes, if you weren't fasting and you're pregnant, do you think you would have been that aware of nutrition and tried to be as mindful?
Probably not.
Interesting.
Yeah, probably not. I think it was that sort of hyper aware state, because then obviously my elders and people around me were a little bit like, okay, it's okay if you fast, but just be careful. And there was a lot of people to answer to. So I didn't want it to be something that was just, doing for the sake of doing it. I just wanted to make sure that I was really looking after myself and looking after my body as well.
Well, absolutely. You all want the same thing, right? You want you and your baby to be okay.
Exactly.
It's interesting because I feel, this is not a rule, but lots of people find that when they're pregnant, they pay a bit more attention to their nutrition maybe, or there's someone else that they're thinking about than if they weren't pregnant. So it's interesting when you were saying that when you'd done Ramadan, you were not pregnant, you weren't as mindful at all. You'd have a day in a glass of milk or something. But then how not just being pregnant, it was actually pregnant and fasting as well made you more aware of that. So, I wanted to say also that sometimes when people think of fasting doesn't have to mean that you're not eating well. And there's a distinction between not having proper nutrition in pregnancy and the experience that you had when you were super hyper aware, because there is loads of evidence about people who are pregnant who aren't eating well. And that is associated with poor outcomes, right? Weight and babies being born early and other associations. So it's not that whilst you don't have to fast when you're pregnant, you can, in a way that if it works for you and you don't have any complications and the timing works out well, there's a way that you can do it. And I feel like in your case, almost use it to your advantage to usually win.
Definitely.
What you're taking into your body.
And I think that's the other thing, going back to the discussion about studies, is that, they can measure women fasting, but then not measure what they're eating. And actually, are people eating properly? And oftentimes it depends so much on, where they are, how many other kids they've got, all of this sort of stuff plays into it.
Right. And so you said you told us about BIMA and looking at the tropic light resource that you had. Did you talk to other people when you were making?
Yeah, so I mentioned, or you mentioned, that I have this Muslim women's kind of discussion circle. It started off in our mosque, where we just sort of had young professionals that would come together discussing spiritual topics and then general topics and how it applies to our life. And then in lockdown, we went on Zoom, and now it's really grown because we have some international attendees as well, which is really nice. So off that, we have the mums group, which is mostly mums or pregnant mums. And I asked her, and I was like, what is your experience? And it was really amazing because there's a big, wide spectrum of experiences. So some women, they have had 3 or 4 kids and they've not fasted any of their pregnancies, which is fair enough. Some women had tried to fast and found it really, really difficult and then stopped. And other women like me had found it much easier because they were paying more attention, or it was a really good timing for them. There were also women who had fasted in some pregnancies and not in other pregnancies, or because it's a month-long fast of a few days and not all of the days. So I think there was it was really nice to see that there was a big spectrum of how people were approaching Ramadan in pregnancy, and I think that influenced a lot. It made me feel like there isn't just one way to do it.
Yeah, and also, I don't know if I'm speaking for you in this, but it feels like you were fortunate enough to be able to, in the sense that, because it's so different, right? You see people who are pregnant, and not even just from pregnancy to pregnancy, from person to person, just every day it's so variable. And it's kind of, I feel like you were also sensing that, which is why you said, let's take it one day at a time without putting that pressure on yourself.
I feel like that taking one day at a time really helped me make it easier, because it didn't feel like I had to fast tomorrow, if that makes sense. I was just each day I was like, oh, it's just today, and it just became this thing that suddenly I'd fasted the whole month, and it was really nice.
How did it compare to other Ramadan?
Honestly, some of the best Ramadans, I think. Well, it was just one Ramadan. Sorry, honestly, one of the best Ramadans, I think, when I was pregnant. And I think obviously comparing it to, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because the following one, I was a mum to a small baby, and I think that comparison I'm very grateful for, because it was a really nice Ramadan where I was very focused in on myself and having that time to do me and have myself and my own spirituality and my own worship and my own prayer. Because obviously the following year it was much different. My priorities had shifted and the timing was different, and everything else, my whole schedule was very, very different. And so I think, and having said that, all of those things in the absence of fasting could still have been present. So even if I hadn't fasted in Ramadan, I still would have had a really lovely Ramadan with lots of worship, lots of really, really introspecting. I think that's the word I'm looking for, and kind of putting forward my goals for motherhood and the coming year.
Yeah, love that. So how that as a period of time to kind of come into yourself and think about this new chapter and how you want to go into that. Which actually, for people that don't want, not even just don't want to, are not able to fast, or this is the decision that when you're pregnant during Ramadan, you're not fasting, which also is completely fair enough, right? Pregnancy is a lot. Yeah. Even if you are pregnant and it's a completely physiological pregnancy, i.e. there are no complications, still a lot for lots of. And so how can you still be connected spiritually if you're not fasting?
So I think that it's really important. So in the Quran, Allah says that fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may attain God consciousness. So it's like essentially the aim of fasting is to be conscious of God, and that's the really like one-liner about what fasting is all about. And I think that there are so many ways that you can be God conscious without fasting, or if you're not fasting in Ramadan. And I think sometimes it's really easy to get a bit of FOMO and a bit of like, oh no, everyone around me fasting, or you really missed it. And there's a few things like in Islam, if we make the intention for something to be worship, it is counted as worship. So for example, being a mum, if you're like washing your child or changing a nappy and you say that, you know what, this is for God, or you just think it, or even if you don't think it, it's still accepted as worship. And so the same way, being really intentional, I think, is a really key thing in Ramadan. If someone's not fasting, or if they're struggling with their connection, folding laundry, like really, really benign sort of like boring things can be seen as worship if as long as the mindset is there and as long as the intentionality is there. And I think that's one of the simplest things, like the simplest parts. And also seeing that in Islam, there's a big reward associated with motherhood, and it's not, and I think, to be fair, like I think until I became a mum, I didn't really get that. I understood. I was like, my mum's great, she's lovely, but I think when you are a mum,
you understood. You understood it.
Yeah.
Intellectual point, but you didn't really feel it.
And then when I became a mum, I was like, whoa, this is why it's such a big deal, because it is hard work. And I think that is really important. I think for Muslim women who are not fasting, but they're raising a child, or they're growing a child inside their bellies, and they're feeding a child, nourishing a child, and all these things, those are all worship in Islam. And I think that's really important to internalize. And it's not something I think some women get. They're still a bit like, oh, I missed that. And I alluded to this in my article with Amalia, which is that for us, worship, or like the acceptance of worship by God, is not based on us feeling it. And oftentimes you don't feel it, but it's something that's really beloved to God. And so oftentimes you're really struggling through something, but it's beloved to God. And I think that's something that is really important for all women to internalize, but especially, and it's not just when we're on our periods we don't fast. It's the same thing if you're taking like a week off. It's the same thing, like to just internalize that everything can be worship if intentional.
That's so interesting. So, I mean, this is broader than Islam, but the whole concept of so much work and activity around the house and like unpaid labor not being recognized. Then if you look at what it seems like from what you were saying, worship can be whatever you want it to be. Like you can set that. And so it seems to be quite powerful in giving power to activities that are obviously helpful, but maybe the way that lots of people in the world or society don't look at it, don't value it, that you can value. And for what you're saying.
Yeah. And honestly, that's one of my favorite things about my faith and Islam, because like there is a big thing about unpaid labor and unrecognized, motherhood and the work and the mental load and the workload. And in the Quran, it's repeatedly stated that motherhood is elevated and recognized, and respect your mother and respect your parent. And there's a lot of sayings of the Prophet, may peace be upon the Prophet Muhammad, where he talks about, I think somebody asked him, who should I give my love and respect to? And he said, your mother. And then he said, and then who? And he said, your mother. And then he said, and then who? And he said, your mother. And then he said the fourth one was the father. So it was like, he says mother, 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 then father. And again, that's something that I feel like once I became a mom, I was like, yes, I understand this. I'm like, even when my husband wants to, he doesn't have milk producing breasts, unfortunately, they're ornamental. I think like really all of that stuff where you feel like, oh my God, I'm doing all of this stuff and it's unrecognized. Within Islam, there is a very strong emphasis that it is recognized and it is noted and it is rewarded and it is, elevated, and it's not, of all things, like it's definitely not unrecognized.
It's very nice. And are there other things? Like I was talking to, I've been trying to like get into it and understand it a little bit more, asking patients if, how they're finding it, and also midwives. And obviously, aside from everyone telling me that this is a good year, they're like, listen, everyone's telling me about like charitable donation, and that's one of the ways to do that. And is that something people could do? Like another way to be connected spiritually, if they're not fasting?
Yeah, definitely. So Ramadan itself, actually, and maybe this is something I should have said in the beginning, but the reason that it's such an important month is that we believe that the Quran was sent down to the Prophet Muhammad in this month, and it's also a month of mercy. So essentially, the gates of hell are closed, the gates of heaven are open. Like everything you do in this month is just multiplied, essentially, and especially in the last 10 days. But the whole month. So it's almost like, if you give like £1 to charity, it's the equivalent of giving £1,000 or £1 million. God knows best, but a huge amount to charity outside of Ramadan, because everything is multiplied. And so really, not only with all the intentionality that I mentioned, there is huge blessing in just doing things from your day to day. But charitable donation is really important. And I think especially, I think, actually, I forgot to mention, I really did want to mention that this Ramadan, I think every Muslim I know, including myself, we're really struggling with what's happening in Gaza and the mothers there, and the maternal mortality and the pregnant women, and like everything I'm thinking about now, all these women who are even outside Ramadan didn't have food and have been under this horrific siege. And I think that obviously donating where we can to them, if we're able to, praying for them. I think it's really changed definitely for me, my perspective on Ramadan and my perspective on my privilege and my blessings and everything that I've got. Even literally when I'm breaking the first day when I broke my fast, it was just that thought of like, I just have food that I can, warm up. When so many women, and not just in Gaza, but I think that is especially weighing down right now.
And even those who do have access to care are, having cesareans without anesthesia.
Yeah, exactly.
The lucky one.
Yeah, and which is wild, because I think the problem with I guess it's a bit of a tangent, but I think the problem with the way that a lot of us see conflict zones, it feels very distant and it feels very like far away from our reality. And I think for that reason, like, you don't realize that anesthesia was something that was readily available in every hospital. Like, women this time last year, women that were giving birth could have any choice of pain relief they wanted in those places. And I think, and the way that that's now changed.
No.
And just basic things like clean water to drink and everything I was talking about, having Ramadan, being nourished, etc. There's such a huge lack of that, and I think that's something that's definitely weighing hugely on definitely my mind, but a lot of the people that I speak to in their minds as well.
Okay, so there's this understanding of Ramadan as this period of time as having huge return on investment. I know that's language, but basically
that's really very good language.
Kind of investment. So if you're thinking about what it is you're investing into, other things, like what are you pouring into, the reward getting from that are way more bountiful than if they were outside of Ramadan. So you can be intentional about your energy and your resources.
Yeah, exactly that. And there's actually a really, really good verse from the Quran, which I'll just share with you. So it says, this is from the same surah, so the second chapter. Yeah. It says, who is it that will loan Allah, so God, a goodly loan, so that He may multiply it for them many times over? And it is Allah who withholds and grants abundance, and to Him you will be returned. So essentially, this idea that when you're giving to charity, you're giving God a loan, and God gives it back to you. Essentially, like you say, return on investment. Right. that's it.
What sense? And what did you call it? Taraweeh? What about that? How is that something that people can kind of use and be a part of in Ramadan?
So getting to the technicality. So essentially, praying at night is a very, very. It's like there are some narrations which say that essentially it's the best time to pray. It's time that the prayers are accepted, that supplications are accepted, and that's throughout the year. So it's not just in Ramadan, but obviously in Ramadan you're waking up to eat before the sunrise prayer, so it's like you're actually awake at that time anyway. And Taraweeh is a prayer that is done around at the moment it's about 8:30, 9, and it's normally in the mosque. And there's a variation, but they essentially try in the month to complete the whole Quran. And so it's about an hour each evening.
Yeah.
And there's sort of like there's my mosque is very, very good. It has amazing space for women, and there are some mosques that are much smaller, so it's packed out by all the men. And obviously everyone's trying, so I'm not going to criticize, but it's quite nice. But our mosque has like a no under 5 rule, which makes sense because the babies cry and they get upset and it's like really late for them. And the main sort of thing is, I think, as in pregnancy you probably could attend if you wanted to, but I think as a mum to a small child with breastfeeding, it's near impossible to go at like 8, and last year it was like 8:30, 9. And I think again, there's so much reward in the prayer anyway. And there's actually a saying of the Prophet where he said that it's just as good for you to pray at home as if you're a woman as it is in the mosque. And that's sometimes misconstrued. Like a lot of quite misogynistic men will say, "Oh my God, don't come to the mosque," because that's what the Prophet said. But actually, that's not what it is. It's amazing. It's actually elevating the status of the mother who's at home, who's like with her 2 children, and like they're crying, and that she wants to be in the mosque and she can't, so she does a prayer at home. And I think that's it makes the equivalent that if you're doing that at home, it's the equivalent of being in the mosque all night or being in the mosque in the evening. And I think that's really important to again internalize. I just think, like, I know I'm saying this a lot, but I think you cannot underestimate the power of motherhood as a form of worship. And I think, especially when it doesn't feel like it, it's like really tough, where the child is sick or they just won't settle, like, all of those other things. And all of those are really, really powerful, powerful pieces of worship, which even if we don't feel it, that's still what it is.
Yeah, and it seems that it can be quite powerful to set that as the intention, but saying that like showing up for my child is showing God.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to the God consciousness thing, like there are times when you are with your child and there's no one else around, and you can, if you wanted to, you could you could hit them, or God forbid, like you could literally do anything, or you could just leave them crying for ages and then just ignore them if they're really, really young, and go and sit somewhere. And obviously I'm not trying to make a comment. There are mums who really struggle and there's not a lot of social support nowadays, but I just mean that there is an element there of that everything that you do as a mother is so God conscious, even if you're not religious. Like, it's so conscious of like, I need to look after this child because that is my role and that's my duty, and it's not, and no one else is here to judge me and no one else is here to give me points, but this is something that is my duty.
Yeah, amazing. And what about the postpartum period? Because I loved reading this bit in the article, but just a bit more from you about how you can be connected to spirituality and Ramadan. The timing coincides when you've had your baby in a period is, for lots of people, difficult. And if it's your first baby, you have no idea, like, you're not being also with the thing of, if you're bleeding, like most people are after they've had a baby, how you can't be fasting, or all of that. How did you find it?
So I think I mentioned this in the article, and like, theoretically, I feel, Ramadan didn't fall for me when I was directly postpartum, but I feel like before having my child, I probably would have thought, oh man, I'm going to miss out on so much, and if I have a child in Ramadan, I'm going to miss out. And then I said in the article that it feels like almost maternity leave that's been given to you by God, because like, you don't have to wake up and pray for almost up to 6, sometimes 8 weeks for a lot of women. You don't have to fast, you don't have to wake up and pray. There's all these things that you don't need to do, just so that you can look after your very new child and just focus on being a mother in those times.
You might wake up to pray.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, that's what's really nice, because you actually wake up, like, I remember, like, I would wake up, obviously, or not even wake up, I would stay awake the whole night. And then my husband would wake up to pray at, like, maybe I think it was like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. And I'd just be in bed, like, with like this, just like relaxing on child's feet. It was just so nice to have that, have a little bit of a break almost. But that being said, obviously that can be a time of disconnection, and you can sort of, with the hormones, you can feel very low. It can be really difficult. You feel isolated, which is a lot of how I felt. I felt really, as my husband went back to work, I was finding it so hard. Like, I just found that my whole day, 24 hours a day, is suddenly this baby, and they're so dependent on me, and I just want 5 minutes to do X, Y, Z or whatever. I think before becoming a mum, most pregnant mums, or most people, don't really understand the all-encompassingness of being a mum. And I think it's so funny. I think that's why moms say things like, "Oh, my child is my proudest achievement," because you literally, like, before that, you've never done anything for 24/7. Like, at work, we get 12 hours break, right? We get our night shifts and then we go home and sleep. And there's always like breaks and everything, or you have a set of nights and you have 3 or 4 days off. Whereas with motherhood, especially that young, it's just continuous challenge. And I was very, very blessed. Like, I had my mom around, I had my mother-in-law around. Like, I've had a lot of support. I have a proper village, and even despite that, I found it difficult. And so, women who are isolated or don't have family around or people that they can depend on, I can only imagine it's really, really, really difficult for them. And I think that's why, going back to in the Quran, God says, "Call upon me, I will respond to you." And I think that is, you don't need to be, you can be bleeding and call upon God. You can be bleeding and make a supplication. When we're bleeding, we don't do the like standing up and prostrating, that form of prayer, but you can do any form of, actually asking God, talking to God, all of those things. There's also something called dhikr, which is like remembrance of God, where you can just like, there's just like small short phrases that you just repeat. And again, that is really powerful because they're very low effort, but again, massive reward, huge return on investment. And really nice to do. And we live in such a nice age where you can just play stuff on YouTube. I used to just play Quran recitations on YouTube, and my baby would sleep to it and I would just feel really relaxed. So I think it's just about, it's almost being a bit innovative and thinking outside the box a little bit about, okay, I can't do my traditional prayer as I know it. I can't do fasting, but then it's fine because God's chosen me to have this baby. And there's a big emphasis in Islam on provision and like destiny, and things being written. So if there is a mum who's had a baby and she's had a baby a week before Ramadan and she's like deep in the postpartum trenches in Ramadan, I think there's a lot about the timing of that and the divine timing of that. And again, I think I wasn't in that mindset at the time, and I wish somebody had maybe spoken to me to tell me to, or like some sort of like therapeutic support to help. But I think just that mindset of like what a great thing it is to have a baby and to raise a baby and to raise the next generation, and support life.
It feels like almost not that different from if you're pregnant or postpartum. You kind of, lots of people have to, or what they do, they look at different parts of their lives and they adapt. They find a new way of being a friend of someone. There's a new relationship, a new way of relating to their parents. There's a new way of where they live. And so you're finding, it doesn't even have to be new, but different ways of relating to your spirituality and your religion. And it doesn't mean that you can't. It's just think about how, just be intentional about how. Yeah. Is what I'm hearing from you. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing actually I've not mentioned is that in Islam there's a big emphasis on prophets and people before us that were mentioned in the Quran, and the stories about them that we read about that you're supposed to take lessons from and take into your life. And so I mentioned it in my article that Maryam, so Mary, Jesus' mum. There's a difference with the Christian version and the Islamic version. So we don't believe that there was there wasn't a Joseph or a husband or anyone. She was by herself, and we do believe in the virgin birth, so that she was ostracized by her community because they were like, how can you be pregnant? You're a virgin, you're not married. And she withdrew herself and she went to, and God says in Surah Maryam, so in the chapter that she's named after her, it says that she went to this date tree and then she's holding it and she's giving birth and the pains of childbirth. And it says in the Quran that she says, "Oh, I wish I was dead and forgotten before this." And I love that for a lot of reasons. I love that it's so humanizing of like the labor experience, and the postpartum experience. And it's not like, and for me, it's one of the things that really redeems the Quran being from God, because it's not like I feel like if a man had written it, it would have been like, and then she popped the baby out and she was like, one little push, all good. Whereas like, I think just that validation of her literally saying, "Oh my God, I literally wish I was dead than go through this," it's just so it's so humiliating. But also, again, like coming back to our point, I think it really validates a lot of what women might be feeling after giving birth, and if it's in Ramadan or not Ramadan, in that postpartum period of just feeling like, oh my God, my life has changed, everything's changed. And I think one thing that I alluded to is it's just really about pushing ourselves to switch that perspective. And I did mention this, like in my article, that there were lots of people. I was on a few groups which were quite negative, and they were just like, "Oh, motherhood is so thankless," and this and that. And I think just flipping it, and as I mentioned, it's not thankless in any way. Like one of God's names is Ash-Shakur, which means the grateful one. So like literally, our belief is that we are being seen. And I don't even know what the original question was, but I think
Well, I agree on a unrelated note, right? That I'm not Muslim and I don't have a child, but people say working in the NHS is thankless, and I'm like, I know, I understand why you think that, but it's not like there's more like there's a magic in seeing patients and being with them and working together to figure something out. So that thing of being able to see things differently and is something I think can be applied broader, right? Not just to the
absolutely.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, and I think it's not something that happens overnight. Like it's almost a process. That's why people have therapy, like to really shift the way that your mind thinks and the way that you apply thought to things. And I think that's why it's not. It's definitely not. If there's a pregnant woman listening to this who's like day 4 postpartum and she's in Ramadan, I don't want to feel like I'm like, think positive, like be grateful, get over it. I think the main thing is it's a slow process, but part of that starts with recognizing like the blessings within the challenge.
Yeah, actually, it's probably important to say that we're not advocating for like toxic positivity. Like everything, I'm so lucky, it's so grateful. Like sometimes it is really, really rubbish.
Yeah.
And actually part of it is recognizing that it's difficult, and even just recognizing the difficulty is sometimes helpful in giving value to what you're doing.
And I think that's why, what I've mentioned with the story of Mary in the Quran, like she said, she's not saying like, oh, this is so easy, it's so great, I'm giving birth to Jesus, he's a prophet, and life is good. She's saying, I wish I was dead. And I think, and actually if you extrapolate that further, she's saying she wishes she was dead before the birth of one of the greatest prophets. Like we highly revere Jesus, and obviously so do Christians. But it's so interesting that like before often the greatest moment of your life, you often feel like quite rubbish. And I think that's true of a lot of things. People that run marathons, people that do any sort of sport, and anything that's challenging. What was that?
But no pain, no gain. But
exactly, no. But it's there's another one that's like, or even like in labour, oftentimes you have like the very last phase when women start saying things like, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. I can't remember what it's called. I'm sure you know better than me. It's called something.
But it's so interesting. For most people, when they feel like I can't do it, and that it happens so often, what they need is someone else to tell them, or someone else to believe in them a little bit more than they themselves, and just in that moment. And then they also believe in it, and that's all they need. It's not that they actually can't, because also
exactly,
as an obstetrician, and I think you can't for some reason. Well, I should have told you that. Like if I'm telling you can, it means that you can.
Exactly. And you know what? I think the point for Muslim women that I want women to take home is that God believes in them, and that's the main thing. Like in birth and pregnancy and postpartum, like who better to believe in you than God, basically. And I think that's the main thing. That it's not, you don't need it. When God says to me, it says to us, "Fall upon me, I will respond." And all of these validation things in the Quran. And this is we just touched the surface. There's so much. Yeah. I think that's what's really important for women to like try and hold on to, and also that it will pass. Like this time, postpartum is really hard. There's hormones through the roof. It's like it's like PMS on steroids. It's like absolutely crazy, but it will pass. And also, not only will it pass, obviously not true of everyone, but I can safely say that I can't remember much of it. So that's the thing.
I wanted to ask a little bit about comparison, because the thing I find with pregnancy is that it's not like having a heart condition or a lung condition. It's that there are so many experts, so many other people who had babies, and there's so many stories, and whether that's people that or on social media, and how does that sit with how you're feeling about your experience? Because I know on paper don't compare to anyone else, and everyone else is different, but in reality, like how was that for you?
That's a good question, and I actually haven't had social media for a really long time. And I think actually pretty much soon after, a little bit after postpartum time, I just sort of deleted everything. Because I just didn't find that it was very positive for me. And I didn't find that I was, the comparison thing is one of them. And I just also think there was a lot of advice. Like everyone's sort of, everyone's the best expert at everything. And you're just like, what? I think sometimes just like almost zooming out of it and just taking from the people that are close to you, people that are actual, people that you respect, people that have actual some sort of grounding in the field, I think really helps. So I think that definitely helped a lot, just from a purely, like, not even as a mum, but just from a purely like using my time wisely perspective, because I always find that doom scrolling, or just when you're scrolling on Instagram or Facebook, whatever, it's almost like dead time, and then you look at your screen time and it's 4.5 hours. You're like, what? That's such a great amount of time, isn't it? That if you could do 4.5 hours or something in the day, I would have accomplished all of my dreams.
That was the Olympic medal. Don't know what is.
Literally. But I think the comparison thing is a really good one, because I think even people listening to this might hear that I fasted and then feel like, oh man, I haven't been able to fast. Or they could be at the same gestation. They could be 24 to 28, but say they tried one day and found it really hard. And I think that's why it goes back to like, it's Islamic. Yeah, of course we shouldn't compare ourselves to anyone, but like God will never compare us to other people. And I think that's really important. Like there is no notion in Islam that we'll be set against someone else. And everything is, you're just compared to yourself, and you're compared to your own, your own potential. And like, did you achieve it? And did you do the best that you could under the circumstances that you were in? And I think that's really, really important to like remember. And I think removing toxic stimuli like Instagram as much as possible is really important. Easier said than done, but I think I don't think everyone always realizes how much of a passive influence it's having on like our mental health or like just our general mood.
100%. I mean, that's just a boundary, right? I mean, people can set boundaries. I mean, lots of people in the postpartum period, my recommendation, I don't know, it's just when you watch people and you go through it with them, set boundaries, like not even just social media, but even having people visit. Like, you want to, the time is going to go regardless, of being intentional about what you let come in, because it's a sensitive period of time. But it's also a very special time. But yeah, being intentional about it.
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because, before I gave birth and before I experienced postpartum period, I would visit like friends of mine who had babies. I would visit them on like day 5 or like day 8. And then now I have friends that I have friends now who have given birth, and I'll message them like, just so you know, I'm not going to even attempt to see you before 6 weeks. I'm sorry if you were planning to see me earlier, but I'm not going to even I'll message you every day, but I'm not going to show up in your house until 6 weeks minimum. Obviously, if you want to extend that at your discretion. And it's great, because obviously they like that, it's met really nicely. And for me, I think for me, I really love social interaction. I love having friends, etc. But I struggled so much having people visit me in the first couple of weeks, because I wanted to stay and chat with them, but I was like, oh, I should take a nap, because like she's literally not slept for 24 hours and now she's asleep for 40 minutes. Yeah, literally. I would be so on edge about like, well, I'm missing my golden nap time. Oh my gosh. And I think, and it's always like lunchtime, or like a time when people would come. And obviously I know everyone's well meaning, just as I was when I was in people day 5. But I think it's just, I think something happens around 1 month, 6 weeks, where it just feels a bit more familiar and a bit less of like this completely new thing. And I'm sure it's also to do with the hormones just like normalizing a little bit as well.
Yeah, and also like each person who's just had a baby, takes them time to figure out the new rhythm of having an person that, like you said, there's this new 24/7 job and like and there's also other ways of showing up. Like it could just be food. You could order them food, or make sure there's drop something off, but not actually go to but different things like that. I find that food in the freezer is like probably one of the most helpful things for people maybe. So there's a common thing, when the last time you ate something that was warm in your postpartum period. What do you miss the most? Let's see if we can do something around that. When I was going to see her, she was like, I miss eating 2 hands.
So I was like, I miss drinking hot drinks. because all of my hot drinks would be like lukewarm or cold by the time I got to the...
What did you find? I wanted to ask a bit, because I know you said that this is probably one of the best Ramadans you've had, but in overall, your experience of pregnancy and postpartum, even up to like now, what were there periods of time that were really difficult? And how did you get through that? Would you have done anything differently now?
So do you mean in Ramadan?
One, just generally your experience and just when things were tough, as I'm sure, and I know that they were, like what got you through? And also, if things that didn't help, what would you go back and do a bit differently? Because everything's easier with hindsight.
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the most important things is just being really honest about your feelings with your partner, if you have one, or whoever you have around you, to just be like, I just think, like using our family or loved ones as crutches to get through that time is really important. And also, I think like, I know that some mums find it really difficult, but something that I tried to learn really early is like relinquishing that sense of control over my baby, where I would just like, leave her with my mom for 2 hours and try and take a nap, or leave her with my husband and just be like, you deal with it, and try my best not to like overhear the crying, or I'd just be like, you know what, it's okay. And I think one of the most important things, which I learned really late into motherhood, I think I learned it well after my child was born, was like when the baby cries, like the worst case scenario is just that they keep crying or they fall asleep. And I think that, honestly, I mean, I'm just going to be honest, I literally thought she would die from crying. Like I thought one time she cried for ages.
And you're a doctor, you're thinking, you're like in that, you're thinking
just in that zone.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, I was driving one day with her soda and she was about 6 months old, and we were in this block of traffic on the M25. Nowhere for me to go, and I couldn't get out, and she was screaming, and I was like, it was so stressful, and she screamed for, I would say, at least about half an hour, and then she just fell asleep, and I was like, what? And I was just like, oh, you're alive, you're safe, you're fine. And when she woke up, she was like, nothing had happened. And I think that experience for me was like, I mean, now I would say to newborn, I mean, it's very hard, obviously, you're like fine-tuned, you're hardwired to respond to your baby crying, and it's a very, very stress-inducing thing. But I think one thing that a mum that I know, she said to me was like, try and tell yourself this mantra of like, this is not an emergency. And I think saying that is very calming. It's like the adrenaline just stops, and you're not freaking out that your child is in danger. As long as most of their needs are met and they're still crying, then okay, babies cry, that's how they communicate. And I think that's like something that really, really helped me as soon as I was able to tell her that, if I have more children, I think that's something that I would be like, it's cool, crying is something you do. I'm sure it will end, and your needs are met, you're fed, you're clean, etc.
Yeah,
we're good. So I think that's one of the main things. The other thing is that I did find a therapist, like a CBT therapist, who I privately paid. So obviously, if there's any free options, would suggest talking to the GP. I mean, if there's any doctors listening, there is a practitioner health, which is very, very good. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, Sujitha.
I have.
It's really good, and they offer
and recommended it to lots of people.
Yes. So that's really good. So it's like essentially it's free therapy, according to how they triage you and what they feel that you need, and so I think seeking out professional help is really important, because I think there's a fine line. There's a balance between when is this baby blues, when is this postpartum depression, when is this something that's hormonally expected of me, and something that actually is kind of veering into more of a mental health condition or illness or disorder. And I think that is really important to try and be as honest with yourself, but also as introspective as possible. And obviously easier said than done. But I think there is, like, I know we've sort of said there's a lot of hormones, etc. But then there is a realm of accepted normality where it's hard for a lot of people. But then there's also a realm where it should be professionally sort of helped.
Definitely. And I guess two things is that even if there is a massive role of hormones to play, that is not to discount how you're feeling. Like, yeah, we might understand why something is, but something can still feel quite destabilizing to you. I think it's quite important to kind of hold in mind. just dismiss it to hormones. I mean, women are just like, dismissed because of hormones so much. So owe it to yourself not to dismiss it because of that. Second thing is this distinction of like, is it baby blues? Is it postpartum depression? Oh my God, am I clinically depressed? That I actually don't think you need to figure that out. Like, you just need to tune into how you're feeling and seek help. And then the professional will figure out with you where you're at and what help you need.
Absolutely.
And you see this all the time. People are coming and they're trying to figure out and diagnose themselves and like, is this going on? It's like, hey, that's my job, Put that out together. You don't need to take that part on yourself.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask you, actually, you said you had a therapist. How, it depends on how much you want to share, actually, but I want, how much of your therapy had to be or even was culturally sensitive?
So great question. I actually sought out a Muslim therapist. So it was a lady who had she'd converted to Islam about 15 years ago, and she was on Zoom, but she was like essentially Muslim, more spiritual focused therapy, and that was really important for me because even in this podcast, like I say things all the time that are like just like it's very second nature to me to mention God or like just say like thanks to God or like in the middle and stuff. And even beyond that, like a lot of how I explain my feelings comes from my faith, and a lot of how I explain, I'm feeling like this because of like I'm not praying or etc. A lot of that I felt like I needed someone who really understood that and really like related to that. It was so beneficial to have that, and she was also a mum, so I mean it was really helpful because I felt like she understood so much of what I was going through and what I was experiencing, not just from like a professional standpoint, like not just intellectually, but actually having lived it and having experienced it herself.
You felt she understood your world.
Exactly. And I think, what's really interesting is like subsequently I had an NHS therapist about a year ago, like a year later, just like it was just this English man. And he was really nice. Like, I mean, he was, I don't want to criticize him, but there was like a moment when I said something, I can't remember, I said something where I'd likened it to my faith or something like that. And he was like, well, listen, we're going to stick to strictly scientific parameters for these conversations. And I understand he was saying, to be, whatever, to be objective. But as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, you don't really get me. Like, we're not, I don't think we're going to vibe. and then I didn't really continue with him. But I think it makes a huge difference. I think I would urge people to say, even from an NHS perspective, you can request people, and they can't always arrange it. But if you're in London and stuff like that, they can normally try and arrange someone who is culturally sensitive and who would understand your whole world.
And it's not really to do about that situation. Is not really with that man. It's more that you had a certain set of needs from what you needed from your therapist, and what findings just didn't match that. Also, you are not the first person to want culturally sensitive therapy. Like I wanted, and this is that I wanted a woman, and I wanted someone who was preferably funny, not well, just because I thought, and that's not to say that what I wanted was culturally sensitive and gender sensitive therapy, and that me specifying that was a shortcut for how I thought I might get it. It's not a given that someone who's a woman or someone who's also South Asian is going to be able to give me what I want. That is also not guaranteed. Yeah. There's loads of examples of people having that and it also not being what you want. It's more it has certain set of needs for what they want in therapy and what a need in therapy, and whether someone else is able to provide that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. What are the things, if you could go back and you wish you could tell yourself when you were pregnant, from in terms of, letters to Inayah, young girl now, things that you would knew, or even just you knew but you wanted to believe in a little bit more, to do with your faith and your spirituality and things that would get you going, what would be the things that you tell her?
I think being kind to yourself is really important. And we believe that God has 99 names, and obviously way more than that, but 99 that are named in the Quran, and prophetic sayings, and two of them are a Rahman and a Rahim, which means the most merciful and the most compassionate. And every single chapter in the Quran opens with those two names. And I always whenever I'm discussing this with my friends or my Muslim sister circle, we always talk about this, like there's 99 other attributes. Some of them are a bit more intense. Some of them are talking about the judge or like the reckoner or that kind of stuff. And some of them are a little bit more well, scary is a bad word, but, you know, a little bit more on that side of like vengeance and that kind of stuff. Or you know, like the Punisher, etc. Whereas like the most compassionate and the most merciful are the two that have been chosen by God in every single chapter of the Quran, like every single one. And so I think like that is a basis of like how we should also approach not just God but ourselves, like with compassion and kindness. And I think like as a mom and as a pregnant person, it's very easy to quickly stop being kind to ourselves and quickly be critical of ourselves and quickly, you know, like, and it's not just Islamically, like anyway, I think a lot of moms feel like that with the comparison or just in general, like, oh, I'm not doing a good job, or this is so hard, like I'm not cut out for this, all of this kind of stuff. And I think actually being kind, it sounds very airy-fairy, but I think practically speaking, it's very powerful to actually give ourselves some space, give ourselves like, cut ourselves some slack, you know, like if I can't do what I thought, you know, if as a mum, and especially as a mum as a newborn, if I haven't achieved the 3 things that I want to get done today, that's okay. I've looked after a whole child. I've created breast milk that's like 500 calories a day. I've like done all of these things that I think I'm not doing anything, but actually I'm doing loads. And I think that's the main perspective shift I think I wish I'd had really early, because I've always felt like, oh, I'm not doing anything all day, I'm just sitting and looking after this kid. But it's such a huge thing to actually be doing, not just spiritually, but actually physically. It's a huge task. It's a huge thing. The other thing I wish, and I did write this in my article, is like I wish I had made a bit of a plan for when I was pregnant for the postpartum period, of like, yeah, just like a YouTube playlist or something that would just be really low effort, but to get me through those like difficult nights or difficult times, and like affirmations, all of this stuff. I think that is maybe when we're feeling quite grounded spiritually or psychologically, they can feel like, oh, I don't need this. But I think at that time when you're quite fragile and you're quite vulnerable, I think you need some proper like planned out crutches almost to be there for you. And I also I think reaching out to other mums is really important, because any mum that I reached out to throughout the reference, but it was amazing. It was just like, I was like, where was this knowledge when as I, you know, like, it's like these people that you spend a lot of time with and you don't even know they have this like wisdom, because you've never accessed them as a parent or a mother. But then when you do, you're like, whoa, you're so wise, and everything you're saying is so amazing. I think I was, you know, I had a lot of benefit from that.
Amazing. And also people say, people whose children are a little bit older, it'll be interesting to catch up with you later as your daughter gets older, that thing is kind, because they say that your children, they go through this phase where they're a sponge and they take on everything that you do. So when you come home, and she you know, my friend said to me, she was, I come home and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. But now she goes home and she goes, Mummy tried her best, you know, because her child is picking that up. And so
Exactly.
By being kind to yourself, you're also teaching that to your children as well, which I thought, and so I was like, oh, you can't be that hard on yourself, because there's someone else, then teach someone else about themselves.
It's so true. And, you know, there's a lot of studies, and I'll try and link you one, but there's a lot of studies about maternal mental health and daughter mental health, and how linked they are. And, like, you know, if there's depression in mums, oftentimes there's also depression in children. And obviously there's loads of factors that play there. But I do agree that a lot of that is the way that you see yourself. The child will often absorb that so quickly, and they're very, very like perceptive children.
I mean, you know, it's very simply like the environment that you grow up in shapes your health. That just as a statement, it just comes down to that, right? And so I just wanted to finish with a bit of a summary. So, and jump in. I'll probably ask you things. You know, overall, it feels like it's kind of recommended not to fast in pregnancy. So you absolutely do not have to. And for most people, it won't be possible, because you will feel rubbish, and actually the person in itself, well, it's one worship, as you said, but you actually just won't feel able to do that. But I wonder if you could summarize that if you are going to fast during Ramadan, what are the things that you can do to kind of help you, and also just touch on the role of timing in that?
So I think, number one, make sure you're nourished. Actually, one thing I didn't mention is that I really planned my annual leave around Ramadan, so that I was like working half days. Obviously, not everyone can do that, I understand. But I mean, I feel like there needs to be so many caveats of why it was easy for me, because it might not be easy for everyone else. So I was only working half days, and I asked my timing to be shifted at 10 a.m. so I can come in a little bit later, which again, one of the, virtues of GP, that you can do stuff like that. Obviously, you can't do that in every medical specialty than other jobs. But yeah, nutrition, I think, is like really important. There's a big tendency in Ramadan to have like, big spreads. And sometimes, when you're hungry, you're like, I want this and this and this and this. And sometimes it's very fried and unhealthy. And obviously within moderation, that's a little bit safer. But I think paying attention to, honestly, nutrients, making sure you're getting your protein, making sure you're getting all the right vegetables, etc. Everything that like you would just be extra focused. I mean, I think dates are really, really good. And I used to have like a date coconut milk oat smoothie for my in the morning, which was and I think that was it, yeah. And it was really good. And it was like I'd like look forward to it, and honey as well, yeah. And so I'd look forward to it.
Smoothie?
Huh?
Then look how happy you look talking about that smoothie.
I'm gonna have it tonight. But yeah, making food that you look forward to, I think, is really important. Also, like reaching out to support, like you mentioned, like not just in postpartum, but actually if people can cook for you, etc. But I think that actually the fundamental advice I would give any pregnant woman or postpartum woman who wants to, or not postpartum, but breastfeeding woman who wants to fast, is just take it one day at a time. And I think that's like the kind of one-liner of everything I've said.
Yeah,
one day at a time.
I thought you were going to miss that. I was like, no, what about the golden?
The golden rule.
Exactly. And also that you fasted when you were in your second trimester, which happened to be when you felt best.
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, really great.
Case for everyone else. And finally, the last thing is, if you are pregnant or you've had a baby and you're not fasting during Ramadan, just outline some ways in which you can still feel connected to your faith and spirituality.
Yeah, so intentionality in everything, absolutely everything, like cooking and, everything, cooking. So that there is I don't actually mention this, but there is a saying from the Prophet where if you feed a fasting person, it's the equivalent of you fasting as well, as for the reward. So that's amazing. If you want to feed people, feed your family, make a meal for your husband, whatever, there's a lot of opportunity in that. And then likewise, making sure that you're donating, all of the kind of standard Ramadan things that you would do anyway. So increasing your Quran, increasing your understanding of the Quran. There's so many resources now online that you can learn about. Increase your kind of knowledge, etc. And also, actually, I didn't mention this either. And maybe it's a topic for another podcast. But actually, like introspecting and looking, because a lot of Ramadan is about our own character and trying to, polish ourselves and be better people and better, and not just to our communities, but actually with our families. But I think that's something that's really easy for me to say. But sometimes if there's family disputes or family things that are going on, actually, or even with friends, like, is there something that we can do because it's Ramadan to try and fix those and try and like mend broken relationships or build bridges? And that is actually very, very challenging, but really, really rewarding. Because again, Ramadan is so much about relationships and all of that as well. So I think there's actually like, if you do a deep dive and what can I do if I'm not fasting on Ramadan? And actually, I should have mentioned this in the beginning. One thing that really changed my perspective is I met this Muslim sister before my pregnancy, about 3 years ago, and she had type 1 diabetes, and so she never fasts because you shouldn't be fasting for type 1.
Yeah, that is the recommendation not to. Yeah,
no, exactly, because obviously you're having insulin like 3 times a day, and yeah, obviously they would probably like get really unwell if they fasted. So she had never fasted in her life. And she was like roughly in her 30s. And it was just so interesting because she was like, these are all the things that I do in Ramadan. And Ramadan for her is very different to somebody. And she was also not going to make up her fast because she's always got type 1 diabetes. So I think that meeting her was like, it put into perspective so many things. Number one, the privilege of being able to make up our fast. And the beauty is in Islam, like, you don't have to make up for hours. You can do it December. So you can make up on December 21st, the shortest day of the year. You can make that up for the one you missed on June 21st, right? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be hours. It's just a fast from sunrise to sunset. And so, like, number one, the privilege of being able to make them up at all. Number two, the privilege of having FOMO from fasting because she's never experienced it.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
No, exactly. And I think it's easy to get caught up in these discussions, isn't it, about like pregnancy and these times. But actually, there's loads of people. It's not just type 1 diabetes. There's a lot of conditions or chronic illnesses where people can't fast at all and don't fast. rightly so. And God has exempted them from that. And it says, and you know, for them, they are supposed to feed somebody else or feed someone poor each evening of Ramadan. And so that's the fidya kafara, which you mentioned. And so I think that is, there's so much, like, I think honestly, everything is about perspective shifting, and just like having that perspective that it's okay. Like, there is so much reward in everything, and there is reward in not fasting. Like, if you're choosing not to fast because of your health and because you're valuing your child's health, that there is reward in that as well.
Oh, Inayah, it's been such a pleasure, honestly, such an honour. What a lovely way to reconnect.
I know. It's been really, really nice. We should do it more often.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I will put in the description some of those resources that you mentioned, like your article, the BIMA traffic light system, a link to your submissions podcast as well. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. It's been a real honour for me as well.
I'll speak to you later. Take care.
Bye.
For now.